Not long ago, I posted a video titled Another Year in My 40s. It was a quick compilation of some training footage from the past year where I was really just demonstrating that, look, once you hit 40, there's still plenty that you can do. I still bust my ass on a regular basis, and I honestly don't feel any different now versus how I felt 10 plus years ago. Anyway, though, since I shared that video, my inbox has been flooded with questions about injuries. How do I deal with injuries? What do I do when I'm injured? What do I recommend to someone who's injured? So there's obviously a lot of people out there with this preconceived notion that if we train hard on a regular basis, we are somehow destined to be injured. So it's a topic that's worthy of a discussion. It's also a topic that I have strong personal feelings about because many, many years ago, I was once a young competitive boxer who unfortunately fell prey to injury, largely due to my own ignorance at the time. I had injuries to my arm, wrist, hands, multiple fractures. There was a point in my life when I honestly felt like I would never not live in a cast. And it's those injuries that eventually forced me to transition to coaching. But looking back, it's also those injuries that made me a better coach. I'm smarter and more careful with my athletes today, but also with myself. Because speaking as a professional boxing coach now, I can't afford to be sidelined by an injury from my own training. I'm not the type of coach who sits on the sideline with a clipboard, so if I'm injured, it affects my ability to perform my job, which, as you'll see, is pretty hands-on. So how do we prevent injury? Well, there's certainly no guarantees. I don't claim to have all of the answers, but what I can do is share my own experience. Because if I look back at the last 20 plus years, I couldn't tell you of a significant injury that's happened to me while training. So yes, I've been fortunate, but I've also been careful. So what I'll do here is share some tips that have worked well for me and can hopefully help you as well. Number one, consistency. I've often said there's nothing fancy about me, there's nothing fancy about how I train. One thing that I am, though, is consistent. It's very rare that I miss a day. There's an old saying that states, first we make our habits, and then our habits make us. Well, one of my habits is to consistently train. I get up and I move, I do something. Because one of the fastest ways to feel old is to take an extended break from an activity and then try to rush back into action. I don't care what it is. Suppose you haven't thrown a ball in a few years. Go down to the baseball field, you start throwing the ball around, guess what? Your arm's hanging. You haven't run in a while. You go down to the track, decide you can do some 100-meter sprints. Guess what? Your legs are hurting. You've been inconsistent. Whereas on the flip side, if we're active all along, we're never forced to start over. So if you want to train without pain, you've got to be consistent with your efforts. Number two, listen to your body. If something doesn't feel right and your body's telling you, you've got to listen to its advice. The whole no pain, no gain mentality does not apply to training through structural pain. So if you wake up and your shoulder, your knee, your elbow, whatever it is, if it doesn't feel right, the worst you can do is just push through it. If my shoulder doesn't feel right, something's not right. I'm going to stay consistent, but I'm going to work around the affected area. I'll train my legs, I'll go for a run, I'll train my core, I'll do something. Worst thing you can do, though, is just push through that structural pain. Because now you might be forced to rest because now you're injured. So I would rather first rest on my terms by working around the affected area and listening to my body. Number three, vary your intensity. Put your ego aside and accept the fact that not every day is going to be your best day. I don't care how hardcore you think you are if you go 100% day after day after day after day. Eventually, you're going to run yourself into the ground. So it's important at times to include some lighter days. Reduce the intensity. It doesn't mean that you're soft. It means that you are training intelligently. The goal of training is not to feel run down and battered all the time. The goal of training should be to build a stronger and more resilient body. One of the ways you do so is, yes, to have hard days, but also to include lighter days on occasion when needed. So we're consistent, we listen to our bodies, and we vary the intensity. Still no guarantee, though, that we won't someday be injured. So what do we do if an injury occurs? Well, I'll start by telling you what you should not do. Don't do what I once did as a young athlete, and that is rush back into action. One of my biggest mistakes as a young athlete was that I was impatient. All I wanted to do was compete. So I kept rushing back, and the injuries then started to pile up on top of each other and spiral out of control. So if you are injured, take the time that you need to heal fully. Err on the side of caution. Don't worry about the gains that you might lose, because trust me, the gains will come back much quicker than they were to initially acquire. So let yourself heal fully and then slowly return to action so that after a few months, that injury becomes a distant memory. If you rush back into action, though, that injury can continue to haunt you. I've been there, I've done that, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone.